Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Um, today we're going to chat a little bit about governing contractors. This is actually two parts. So today we'll focus more on keep building this out for you all. So today we're going to talk about the front half of governing contractors. And our next session in 3 weeks will concentrate on the back half. So today we'll focus more on the how do we bring contractors into our organizations, and what is the life cycle of bringing a contractor in? What if a contractor is assigned to multiple contracts? Some of the different models for external user governance, and why contractor management and onboarding is so important. So I think one of the big things is, right, a lot of times we focus on the employees when we go into an identity governance scenario, and especially in the federal government space or even the state and local government space. Once you add in the federal contractors, the grant employees, the foreign integrees that support our missions, right, a lot of times that's 2 to 3 times the size of the user base of the employee side. And honestly, the turnover there is much higher than on the employee side as well. So sometimes it's better to take a look at that side of the problem first from a cost saving scenario. So we'll dive into a little bit about that today. So this is the 4th part of the series. I think you know who I am by now. So passionate about ICAM. That's the best way to put it. So so setting the foundation. Majority of the agencies we've worked with, it takes somewhere between 5 and 10 days for a new contractor to get access to the systems and really become productive. Right, and when we think about it, each one of those contractors, we're paying 8 hours a day, every day to do that, and if they're not busy in those beginning days, we're still being charged. The latest numbers from Deltek last year showed that there's about a 20% turnover rate inside of the contractor base as well. So even if we're not looking at the contractors who change contracts within their own company, we're looking at over 1 million accounts created, updated, deleted, changed in a yearly period. So if you take the average contractor bill rates, a 20% turnover rate of 1 million users, if we could bring down that 5 to 10 day onboarding time just by a day and a half, we'd save over $1 billion a year inside of the government, right? That's an insane number, right? And if we started building that out even further, right, and we brought that, if we split the difference between 5 and 10 days and save 6 days off of the onboarding time, that's $4 billion a year, right? In general, that's huge numbers for us, right? That's things that we can go to our management and say, hey, what if I could save the organization $10 million next year, right? There's no manager that would go, I don't want to do that, right? And really, it allows us to keep going. So I'm just validating. Can you all still hear me now? Okay, thanks, Katie. Sorry, I got some of those messages and didn't know if they were new or the old. So now I got a checkpoint in the chat window. And I think I've said this multiple times, right? IAM in the past has always been sold as a security measure and a scare tactic. And that's not the way I like to go into programs. I really like to work on how does this driving business value and helping the organizations do things faster and more reliably rather than trying to scare people. But if you take a look at the Target hack that happened back in 2013, it wasn't them coming through a network. It wasn't them coming through compromising an employee account. It was really a contractor. And out of everything, it was an HVAC company. So the company the HVAC company used shared credentials on all of their refrigeration systems that they were supporting and updating firmware from afar. Right? That's how they got into the network. It wasn't anything that the target had done themselves other than not segmenting off their HVAC controls inside of the network in the stores. That's a different issue. But, right, contractors don't fall under the same rules that employees do. So really it brings a different point of risk and another reason why we need to focus on them. So one of the things I really wanted to focus on today was chatting a little bit about onboarding contractors and how it looks simple from the beginning. And one of the questions I had, and we have that in the chat or in the Q&A section, if Katie, you can open it up for us. How many of your organizations have a single place that we can go to say, here's all of our contractors, here's the contracts that they are assigned to, here's the owner of those contracts who essentially would serve as their manager, and here's when that contract ends. So I'll just throw that out there, give you all some time to pull that, answer those questions. The numbers I'm seeing right now are a lot better than what I normally see when we go into an organization, but we'll bring that back up a little bit later. But right, in most organizations, onboarding is at first glance simple, right? They look at this and say, oh, we have an enterprise resource planning system. That's where our contracts are. That's where our contractors are loaded. From there, we can figure out who the manager is. And then we just give the manager a work item that says, hey, is this person going to start? If so, when's their start date? And then allow them to set it. And then when that start date shows up, we create their accounts on day one, right? If they're not going to start, we're going to push that back to personnel security or whoever runs the ERP system saying, hey, this contractor was supposed to come on board. I know you went through the background checks. I know you went through all the security stuff, but they found another position or they're joining another program. They're just not going to work for us, right? It seems pretty simple. But what I challenge you is when you start designing these processes in your organization, start asking questions of, well, what if that doesn't work, right? And so here we have an example of what happens if we have a contract that doesn't have a manager. And as crazy as it sounds, one of our government agencies, they about 20% of their contracting officer representatives, who they picked as the manager for all of the people on the contracts, didn't actually work at the agency anymore, and they didn't have active accounts themselves. So if you can imagine, we've got 20% of our contractor base that has no manager at this point. So, right, what happens if a person comes in and first off, they don't have a contract assigned to them, right? That happens a lot more often than we realize, where this contractor was put on for a project, and maybe while they were going through their background process check, the project ended, right? But now they're still good to go. Or maybe that project changed ownership, or they combined it with another project. So the thing they were originally assigned to, they're no longer a part of. So we kind of have an orphan contractor out there with no manager owner to put them on. So, right, if they come in, they're marked as a contractor and they're not assigned to a contract, you want to tell the ERP people, hey, we've got this orphan account here. Either take them off because they're not coming anymore. We don't know who to assign it to find out if they're coming, or we need to figure out how to fix the data, right? And a lot of time those ERP onboarding folks have the original documentation, what vendor they came from, which prime contractor they came from, that they can reach back and understand the person's actual clearance. The other nice thing about this is, right, because we are getting the information from the ERP system that they're ready to go, that we can also sit there and a lot of times with these agencies, you've got to keep checking the system every week, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks to see if they've everyone calls it popped yet, right? That they've made it through the approval process, right? Those delays, even 2 or 3 days or weeks between checks, or when a manager's on vacation and doesn't check it for a week or two, right? That drags projects down and prevents us from getting people onboarded very, very quickly. So something like your governance system, when that thing pops in the ERP, we're telling the manager on day one, hey, they're ready to go. Let's get a start date set. But at the same time, right, if the person has a contract set, we need to figure out who that contract owner is and how we determine who the contracting officer representative was. And I have a fact down here in the same government agency I mentioned, 15% of their contractors that had active accounts weren't actually listed on any active contract. So we really had to go through and say, should these people be here? Should they not be here? Where do they belong? Right. So they had a major data quality problem, which is what I talked about in the last scenario, or the last session we had. But right, I would bet that many organizations, that's a common case. Or there's a separate system where people sponsor people that aren't tied to projects, and that data needs to be brought in and governed as well. So, and then we would think figuring out who a contracting officer representative is an easy thing to do, right? We should just go look up in the contract system and it should tell us who it is. Well, what if there's an assigned contracting officer representative and they're not active? Who does that go to? Is that a report that goes over to the contracting shop and they need to fix their data? Do we automatically say until a valid core is set, the contracting officer for that contract becomes the manager? Sometimes we have multiple contracting systems or disconnected ones, especially if we're into more of the secret missions, where you might have some black projects that things are assigned to. So you might have a whole separate group that you have to reach out to get that data fixed for. But at the end of the day, you've got to build all of these escapes in and processes in to make sure that you're following your FAR clauses, to make sure that you're asserting that the people are still here on a regular basis, and then pushing the process along as people come in. The other thing we have built in a lot of times is an acting core thing, right? Where the CO can say, hey, that person just left, but for now, we're making this person, maybe it was a deputy, the acting core until that position is reset. And then from the system perspective, we're going to watch every time we pull the data in that, hey, is there a new core assigned and they're active, yes or no, and then reassign all of the open work items, all of the employees, managers to that new core and drop this acting core. But right, it's very much think through those escapes of the process. So, and then right at the end of the day, our last step is to provision and activate our accounts. So one of the things that, so that kind of gets us through that onboarding process. We're looking at data from our authoritative source, which I am extremely happy to see that data exists in one place for 70% of the people here. I want to talk to you because that has not been the common theme at most of the places we've worked with. So, especially for some of the larger organizations that I would hope it was there. But yeah, I would love to understand what you guys did and how it's working and how it's done right. So, so we're pulling that data in, looking for new contracts coming on, looking for changes to the cores, right? If a core change happens, reassign all those people automatically to the new manager of that contract, right? If the core leaves the organization, automatically assign it to the CO or alert the CO that that person's no longer with the organization, because you would be amazed how many times people leave an org because they're in a different group and they don't tell the contract shop that that role has to change. And it sits open for 2, 3, 4 weeks until somebody makes a phone call and goes, hey, this has been stuck. How do we do that, right? So think of those processes, think of those procedures on how to keep the wheels greased and the system moving along. So Once we've got those processes in place and you tailor it to your organization, there's always a discussion about birthright applications and what is the right way to handle birthright. So, and when I say birthright, that means what are the applications that every single person in this organization has access to, right? And I'm sure you've got, some places have thousands of applications that need to be integrated into this system. But at the end of the day, a lot of them don't cover huge user bases. So what I tell most organizations is focus on what people need on their first day, right? Everyone knows you need an Active Directory account. Even if you have a CAC or a PIV card, right, you still need an AD account to link that to. Before it was everyone needed a laptop. Now a lot of times it's you need either a VPN connection or a remote desktop connection and access to Office 365 inside of Azure, right? So you need to create that Azure account and then you need to assign them that Office license. Sometimes that comes with email. Sometimes email is a separate system, but right, everyone on their first day needs email. They need their training system because until they take their AUP training, right, their annual user training, until they take their information awareness training, a lot of times we can't even give them access to other systems. So they need that access on day one, that as soon as that comes through, we can trigger to give them the rest of their apps, right? And then VPN access. And then maybe you're pushing some data over to your CAC card system so they can go get their cards cut. But what I tell everyone is cover those things first, right? It's something every employee, every contractor, every person working on a grant has to do, right? And then where I tell people to go next is go to the leaders of every department, whether you call that department, organization, whatever it's structured in your org, and say, what does everybody, without exception, in your department need access to? Tell them we've got these 5-6 things already covered, but if you're in finance, I'm guessing you need access to the finance app. Maybe not the permissions yet, but you need access to the finance app, right? If you're in HR, you need the ERP system, you need the HR system. Maybe you have timesheet systems that are different by organization, right? Those type of things, when it's everybody in that department, that's the stuff I onboard first, and then I stop. And I don't get into the roles of those applications at first. I don't get into the niche where 80% of the people need this or the sub-department of the organization needs this. I really stop at that point and watch the system work, right? And then I start doing my due diligence of onboarding the other apps. But at this point, you really can let the system do its job. Make sure that your onboarding procedures are working, that you've built in escapes, that there's no weird data that comes in at weird times of the month or weird times of the quarter that throws things off. And just make sure it works. And then from there, work with your help desk teams and really understand where are they getting the most tickets to create, update, delete, manage accounts from there. And then start biting them off by that cost savings of the amount of time that they're spending to manage those things. And maybe you have some high profile ones, maybe you've got some very sensitive ones if you need to do separation of duties things, but this really shows business value very, very quickly to most organizations. So that's kind of my recommendations. So from there, we'll jump in. One of the other things that we find constantly overlooked when we go to work with organizations is that many times contractors are on multiple contracts at the same time. We've seen about 10% of the contractor workforce is on multiple contracts, right? They have specialized skills that they have, right? If you've got someone from like a Microsoft that is really good in databases, they might support 4 or 5 contracts at a time because they're a database expert. And right, you want them to be requesting their access associated with the contracts they're working for, or else you're going to get into a scenario where they just assign it to the same manager every day, and that manager is blindly approving things. So you really want to think about, okay, if someone is assigned to multiple contracts, how do you build in a way for them to pick which contract, which manager these requests and approvals are going to, and tie that to that contract moving forward, so that when certifications come up and we want to verify that they should continue to have that access, that verification is getting assigned to the right person, and it's not just blindly being assigned to the manager, one of the managers. A lot of times people go, whatever one comes up first alphabetically or first in the list, right? That's not the best way to do it. So think about those problems. This is a process on the screen that one of our customers used. I personally didn't like it at all because this is basically, they modeled it as a manager change. So all of the person's access would get moved to the new manager if they wanted to request access for a different program. And then the new manager would take responsibility. I'll be honest, it didn't work because they made the old manager say, yep, I agree to release this person to this new person. But at the same time, they wanted them to certify the access on contract change. And this person's like, I'm on 15 contracts. I have to do this every other day, and it takes 2 days to switch these managers out. But, right, there's wrong ways to do this too. So really think through from a usability perspective what makes the most sense, not only from the requester, but also from the approver and from the security side. So it can get a little complex, but definitely some good models out there to do it. So back to the question we had earlier, who has a centralized source? As I said, I'm pretty impressed by this group. We've got 70% of people saying they have a centralized source for all of their contracts, who's assigned to those contracts, who owns those contracts, and when their end dates are. So bravo to your organizations. That's really quite impressive. Maybe we've just gotten lucky and seen majority of the ones that don't have that in place, and that's why they're having so many data issues. But a lot of times we see two different models when it comes to governance. And originally I saw the vendor-driven model a lot more on the commercial side of the world. But we're seeing more and more of that happening in government lately. So the one model is you have a sponsor-driven one, and a lot of times we do have scenarios when people aren't directly tied to a project. Maybe they're a vendor coming in. Maybe they're coming to site to support something for 2 weeks and going away. So we're not really tying them directly to a project, but we still need to govern those people's access and how long they have it, and make somebody on the government side take ownership for them. So a lot of times we have sponsors that are nominated, people who are allowed to take ownership of people, authorizing officials sometimes is what they're called, where they go into the SailPoint system, and we've built an invite service where they send an invite directly to the person at their corporate email. Sometimes that's whitelisted to certain domains, so you can't invite your buddy from Gmail in. And then a token goes out where that person self-registers themselves, gives all of their corporate information, maybe ties in their multi-factor authentication device, and then the sponsor approves that access. And then normally we prompt that sponsor if it's in a not attached to a contract for an end date for that person, and then make them quarterly certify that person is still there. And then also give them reminders as we come up to that end date. Hey, this person's going to be offboarded from the systems on this date. Do you need some to extend them, or is that date good, or are they already gone and we can just push the button and disable their accounts today? But a lot of times that is individually managed, tied to individual people, and not as data driven as we want, but definitely a necessary solution. We tend to see a lot of organizations who have foreign integrees, is what they were called at DHS, right? But foreign nationals that are coming in and supporting the missions, that they don't necessarily part of a contract shop. They're not necessarily a government employee. So this is a way to handle those. Another way is vendor driven. So we have projects, but also define who the prime contractor is on those projects and give them admin capabilities to manage their own people inside of there and assign them to the contracts or assign them to the agency, and then the contract owner approves and picks them up. So that releases some of the burden when there's not an authoritative source, to push that out on the vendors to actually manage their own people. A lot of times we'll give them a bulk upload capability to say, every month you got to give us the spreadsheet of who's active and not active. And we look at that spreadsheet and go, has anyone changed? Has anyone been removed? Has anyone been added? But that's another way to drive that when you don't have an authoritative source yourself. Both of these models have pieces that are already built into the SailPoint tool to do it. A lot of times we end up extending those specific for the use cases of a specific government or corporate agency, but really good stuff out of the box that's available. So as always, I blew through my time. We wanted this to be 30 minutes and we're at 32 right now. But so why is contractor management important? At the end of the day, they're not your people. They're not employees of the agency. They play by different rules, right? They have their own laptops. They have corporate laptops. They have their own training programs. They have their own lockdown capabilities. They can be a huge risk. At the same time, we're also granting them some of the most privileged accounts in the organization. A lot of times we're bringing them in to do back-end data administration, back-end server administration, giving them the keys to the kingdom and some of the most sensitive data that our organizations hold. So there has to be a level of trust and governance of these people, and we can't just leave them on the networks for a long period of time. And then if we automate a lot of this and focus on the onboarding side, we're accelerating productivity, right? If, as I said earlier, if you come back and say, hey, it takes us 10 days to onboard people. If I put this program out there, we can get people up and running within 2 or 3 days. That's 7 days times 8 hours a day times X dollars an hour for your average contractor rate for your agency. That's real money real quick. And really, you look like the hero because these programs can move much, much faster at that point. And then at the end of the day, unmanaged accounts equals risk for your organization. And like I said, I hate going back to that scare tactic, but 95% of hacks are due to compromised credentials. If you have people whose accounts are active and on your network but no longer working for you or supporting your mission, those can be attack vectors that people come in and they probably are using their same account at their corporate networks. If their corporate side got hacked, or even their Netflix password, and they're going to come at you and use their first name dot last name from LinkedIn and see that they supported your organization, figure out what your email address pattern is, first name dot last name dot ctr@agency.gov, and try that password and see if it gets in. And now they're inside the kingdom. We had a case where one of our commercial customers had a consultant that was in an administrative capability. He had created himself an admin shadow account that wasn't tied directly to his name, and they weren't doing identity governance to validate that those accounts had owners that were humans. They laid him off, and he came back in on a Friday night and started shutting down their production systems. Nobody knew how, why, where it came from, why it was being shut down. This company sells pizza delivery for a living. Fridays are their most busy nights, and they started losing orders. It was millions of dollars they lost that night. They got the FBI involved, and the guy's actually in jail, but right, a lot could be pointed back at them for not properly managing their accounts, right? And that's the type of things that adversaries want to take advantage of. So that is everything I had for today. Our next 4 sessions are listed here. We're going to finish the contractor onboarding story here on October 29th, talking about contractors as they move between projects, how we deal with certifying them on a quarterly basis, and then also as we offboard contractors, right, and contracts come to an end, how we might deal with waiver processes, and or extend people if the authoritative sources aren't done. And then we'll talk a little bit about managing applications with DevOps to bring on applications faster, onboarding new employees in December, and then using user behavior analytics and risk of what people are actually using their applications for, and driving that back into your identity governance program. So we'll take a quick look at questions and open up the lines if anyone had any other things to ask. All right, so looks like I talked too much again today and no new questions coming in. So as always, we'll have the recordings posted out in the next couple days. Feel free to share with your friends and colleagues. And as always, if there's any questions, please feel free to reach out to the Caresoft team or myself. More than happy to help. So hopefully everyone got some good information today, and look forward to seeing you in 3 weeks when we talk about the other side of the contractor problem.